Have all three of you with us. Congressman, if I may begin with you, let's start with Michael Cohen a little bit. Did Michael Cohen plead guilty to crimes or not? How do you see this?
Well, he absolutely pled guilty to a crime, and during his allocution in open court made clear that the President of the United States, then a candidate, was an active participant in that criminal activity. And let's just take a step back and look at the totality of the situation. There is clearly a cloud of illegitimacy hanging over 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue that's growing bigger by the day. You've got Michael Flynn, guilty. George Papadopoulos, guilty. Paul Manafort, guilty. You've got Michael Cohen, of course, guilty. These are individuals who are incredibly close to the President of the United States of America. And we've got to get an answer to the question, what did the President know? When did he know it? When this crime spree was taking place all around him. We've got to clean up corruption with this administration in Washington, D.C., restore our democracy for the people.
We played, Maya, some sound bites of those that are coming out and defending the president, saying that this is not a crime. Some, to maybe some extent, are saying, yeah, maybe it's legally a crime, but it's like a smaller crime, a misdemeanor. What is your read of what Michael Cohen did in terms of the campaign finance violation? Is it significant or is it not? Is this being blown out of proportions for political reasons?
This is extremely significant because it goes directly to whether or not a candidate, Donald Trump, directed Michael Cohen, his attorney, to essentially quiet a scandal that might potentially interfere with his election. That's exactly what the election laws are designed around. It's explicit that a candidate must declare, even if it's his or her own money, must declare the fact that they are using it to advance their campaign. So any way you slice it, this is significant.
Does it vary based on the amount of money? You know, if somebody did it for $5 as opposed to $250,000 to two women.
Well, look, we've got a $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels,
and I think $120,000.
Yeah, so, look, there's no question that we're talking about a large sum of money, but I think the issue here is if you're trying to protect what Lindsey Graham himself said in the context of Bill Clinton's impeachment process, that it's about cleansing the office of the presidency. This is actually a significant issue. I think the fact that we have a president who's also said inconsistent things about it regularly demonstrates that there's a real issue about whether our commander-in-chief is actually a commander-in-thief.
Interesting point there. Let me ask you about that money aspect. Alan Dershowitz, as you heard earlier in that soundbite, making the argument that if the president is asking somebody to do it, if he's commanding him to do it, paying out of his own money, that it's not a crime. Had Cohen gone off and done this on his own without the president's knowledge, he would be the person liable for this. To that end, do you agree with Alan Dershowitz? If not, you know, Trump's saying that there's no crime here because it's his own money. How do you see it, Ellie?
Yeah, well, all due respect to Professor Dershowitz, I think he's wrong here. You know, what we're seeing is sort of the three-step shuffle that we've seen from the president and his defenders over and over again, which is admit the conduct, then deny the conduct, then deny that it's criminal. And Professor Dershowitz is part of that. No, even under Professor Dershowitz's read, it's an expenditure. And if it's an expenditure, it needs to be reported. And the president did not report it. Therefore, he filed false paperwork with federal authorities. So either way, the president is in criminal trouble.
But how severe is that to not report it? I mean, could it be negligence? And negligence in itself is not as significant as the intent to cover up?
Yeah. That's a key question. But if he knew about it, and I think there's ample evidence that he knew, then it's more than negligence, then it's willful. And keep in mind, this is effectively what John Edwards was prosecuted for and brought to trial for years ago. Now, Edwards was acquitted because there wasn't enough proof that the expenditures were made to protect him in the campaign. The argument was he was trying to protect his privacy and his family. Here, though, if you look at the amounts, as Maya pointed out, and the timing, right? These actual alleged affairs happened many, many years before, and then just weeks before the election, that's when they need to cover them up.
And Michael Cohen was reimbursed after the president got into the White House.
Reimbursed after, and remember that Rudy Giuliani, as a legal representative of the president, said Imagine if this had come out on October 15th, 2016. He himself, even as he was trying to argue this was about protecting the marriage of the president, in the same breath said this was about the election.
And the politics of it. So let's speak a little bit about the politics of it. Given what we are seeing emerge over the past 24, 48 hours, are we beginning to see Republicans crack here in their unity around the president and their support for this president? Do other colleagues share your sentiment that you expressed earlier that there's a cloud of suspicion over 1,600 that needs to be addressed?
Well, I certainly hope so, because this is not really a Democratic issue or Republican issue. It's an American issue. But unfortunately, what we've seen from my colleagues on the House Judiciary Committee on the Republican side and throughout the Republican conference is that they've engaged not as Americans, but as part of the cover-up caucus, basically to hide and to cover up the things that Donald Trump has done relative to crimes that may have been committed at his direction or through his underlings, possibly connected to collusion with Russia to sell out our democracy. And instead of trying to get to the bottom of what has occurred, they basically are taking orders from Donald Trump to cover it all up, and that's shameful. That's irresponsible, and that's a dereliction of duty relative to who we are as a separate and co-equal branch of government.
Let me ask you, Maya, really quickly about the juxtaposition of Donald Trump's reaction to what happened with Paul Manafort and what has happened with Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen, he's saying he was a bad lawyer. If you're looking for a good lawyer, don't hire him. A bit of a dig there. But when it came to Paul Manafort, praise, saying he felt sorry for him, expressing sympathy for him, saying he was a brave man. Why the difference? How do you read the difference between these two men that served very intimately with the president?
Very clearly, Michael Cohen flipped on the president. He pointed the finger, he called him out, he said he committed a crime. Paul Manafort refused to actually cooperate with prosecutors. He did not plead guilty to any of his crimes. He went through the entire court process and had to be actually found guilty by a jury of his peers. So what the president is signaling both to Paul Manafort as well as to others out there who may have to make a decision about whether or not they're going to cooperate with prosecutors and investigators, he's saying, if you stick by me, I will stick by you. If you turn on me, I will come at you, guns blazing.
And to that point, let's ask about pardons, because this is kind of like the big question everyone wants to know. It was certainly something Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked about it today. Take a listen to Laney Davis talking about a possible pardon from Michael Cohen.
Is he hoping for a pardon from President Trump?
Not only is he not hoping for, he would not accept a pardon. He considers a pardon from somebody who has acted so corruptly as president to be something he would never accept.
All right, so what is your take on what you just heard there from Laney Davis?
Yeah, I take Laney Davis at his word on that. I don't think there's any chance Michael Cohen receives a pardon, and even if he did, it wouldn't necessarily shut him up. But Manafort, I think we need to watch very carefully for. He's a 69-year-old man. He's now been convicted of 8 federal crimes. He's looking at time in prison that could be all or much of the rest of his natural life. And so he doesn't have too many outs left anymore. One of them is cooperating, but that's a big river to cross. And the other one is a pardon. And I think what the president may be doing, and as Maya pointed out, is setting the stage for a pardon. Because if the president pardoned Manafort, I think we would all see what's going on. He wants to keep him quiet. He wants to keep him from cooperating, take away that other option. But by saying, oh, he's been so unfairly prosecuted, it enables the president to say, no, this is what pardons are for. I believe it was an unjust prosecution. Maybe you disagree with me, but I'm the president, and I can do that if I want.
Yeah, and we'll certainly see if that happens after the trial in D.C. Congressman, before I let you go, I got to ask you about the politics of what this means going into the midterm elections in the spring. You said the Democrats have no interest in going down the road to impeachment. Is that still the case? Should Democrats and members of Congress consider impeachment against this president?
Well, I think House Democrats, we're going to remain focused on our For the People agenda, which means pocketbook issues. We're going to drive down the cost of health care that are spiraling out of control because of Republican recklessness. We're going to increase the pay of the American worker. We've got wage stagnation, underemployment challenges throughout America. And we're going to focus on cleaning up corruption. Now, we fought for the recusal of Jeff Sessions. He recused himself. We fought for the appointment of a special counsel. Bob Mueller was appointed. So now we just have to let Mueller be Mueller, do his work, finish the investigation, report to the American people, report to Congress, report to the Department of Justice, and then at that point, we'll let the chips fall where they may.
All right, Congressman, appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining us, Congressman Jeffries. Guys, I'm going to ask you to stick around, Maya, Ellie, please. We've got a lot more to discuss this hour.